Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and today we're going to be giving you the top 10 most overpowered builds for patch 13.18. We're going to be talking about two champions from each role as they're easy to get into with strong, effective builds. Make sure to like and comment on the video if any of these builds help you on your climb. We're going to be going by role starting with top lane. As of 13.18, bruisers dominate top, and it's easy to see why. These champions are simple, have incredible items since the buffs, and can also solo swing games. Our picks today are strong against the often picked Gore Drinker and Stridebreaker champions while also still having solo carry potential. Garen is our first OP pick for this video. Phase Rush Garen has been dominant for a long time, but the new Stridebreaker buffs have really pushed him over the edge. As long as we ban Camille, Stridebreaker, Berserker Greaves, and Hullbreaker Garen is a scaling monstrosity. This champion overkills most squishies with half of a combo and is impossible to catch simply due to Phase Rush. Always make sure to run Flash Ignite or Flash Ghost on this champion with the Phase Rush setup for easy kills and easier escapes. If you're interested in taking your gameplay to the next level, head on over to GameLeap.com by clicking on the description box below. I've spent years making champion courses with the best tips, tricks, and techniques for you to devour. Don't miss out on these, head over to the website now. Illaoi is our next pick for the build list. Contrary to Garen, Illaoi is much better at sticking in a fight than leaving one. It is no secret that Illaoi has risen to the top of popularity recently, and there's a few reasons as to why. Most of the best top laners in the game are all-in focused, which Illaoi shuts out. Split pushing is back, now that ADC isn't so overpowered, Illaoi excels at this. Steric's Gauge has also received some massive buffs, which is an indirect Illaoi buff as well. For this champ, we can choose between two setups, Grasp with Iceborne and Conquer with Divine Sunder. After we finish our Mythic, we complete our boots, and then we finish Black Cleaver into Steric's Gauge. The last two items are always going to be situational on this champion. Gargoyle Stoneplate is absolutely busted since we have so much HP, and Spirit Visage is always great if we need MR. We go Grasp with Iceborne into squishy carry champions, and then Conquer into the tankier lineups. Now that we covered our top laners, let's go ahead and talk about the jungle champs. Jungle champions have changed a pretty large amount from last patch. Rek'Sai is still completely overpowered, but her awkward playstyle is kind of hard to adapt to when compared to most of the easier junglers. That's why Nocturne is our first pick on this list. Nocturne offers similar levels of utility as Rek'Sai, but is hands down a better pick for climbing. He's significantly easier, punishes people for being on the wrong side of the map just as hard, and gets to dip into the broken bruiser item pool better than most other champions. Stridebreaker is our best friend on this champion. Stay away from the lethality builds. Stride provides attack speed, movement speed, and a slow, which all but guarantees that our E goes off even through flash. Next up, we generally want resistance boots, but Ionians do just as well if we have a huge lead. And for our final core item, we want to go Cleaver. Cleaver's move speed increase is a must on Nocturne, especially when paired with the slow from Stridebreaker. This allows us to punish people incredibly hard for stepping out of position, even if we end up messing our Q. Sterix is a great supplementary item afterwards. Nocturne with this build is a sticky 1v9 machine that gets multiple ultis off in quick succession, because then after this we're able to dip into Axiom Arc. This is really strong picking people and for winning solo queue games. Briar is next up on this list. This champion is a nightmare when played correctly. In the tier list video I placed her kind of low. I still feel like she's not the greatest champion in the game, but after some time behind the wheel and watching her develop as a whole, she definitely isn't terrible. Gore Drinker is hands down the strongest mythic item for Briar at the moment. I've mulled over quite a few stat sites, been watching an excessive amount of gameplay, and played her with a bunch of items myself to come to this conclusion. The item just feels good on Briar, largely due to the huge amount of HP and sustain that it grants. Stridebreaker, while having decent stats for her, feels a bit overkill in most situations. Briar's mobility with her W dash and Q is nutty, making the Stridebreaker active a bit redundant. Stride also doesn't provide nearly as much tank stats as Gore does, the mythic passive being a huge contributor to this. For these reasons, I wouldn't recommend that you play Stride on her. Gore Drinker into Swifties or Resistance Boots, and then Cleaver is hands down the way to go on this champion at the moment. This gives you a big mix of durability, damage, and sticking potential through all the ability haste and Cleaver's movement speed. This also allows us to dip into the broken bruiser items, which everybody of course knows are overpowered. That being said, the Eclipse lethality build also is pretty decent. It just has different strengths. Bruiser is stronger in mid and late game, whereas lethality is really good in the early game and decent into mid game. I'll throw this setup in as a bonus, but don't tell anyone. If we are against a team of squishies, then we can go lethality, otherwise Gore Drinker is the way to go against a balanced team composition. Mid lane received a rework to Crown of the Shatter Queen last patch, and this item is sleeper overpowered. It makes melee AP mids like Sylas really scary as they survive after going in quite consistently. The change to this item's stat line makes it more beneficial for you to actually go in, get comboed, take reduced damage overall, than it did before. Before, we only had one real spell that we'd be able to block. Now we can eat a full combo. For that reason, Sylas is first on our list. POW Max is super strong into ranged opponents that play ultra passively, and WEQ Max is ridiculous into just about everything else. With Crown as a first item, there isn't really a skirmish that you can't instantly take over as Sylas. This makes him very one-sided to play with almost no room for error from your opponents. The The other day in solo queue, I watched a 1-1-4 Sylas kill 3 champions in a 1v4 because they all dropped a combo on him while he had Crown active, which led to him survive with sub 100 HP like 3 different times throughout the fight. I am telling you, you need to play this champion with this item if you love high-risk playstyles. It's actually hilarious how strong this combination is. Crown, Ionian Shoes into Zhonya's or Shadow Flame is the way to go on this champion. We want to go Zhonya's if we're against a little bit more heavy CC, and then Shadow Flame if we want to pop weak backline squishies. But regardless, Crown is definitely the strongest mythic on Sylas. That doesn't mean that things like Everfrost or Night Harvester are bad, it just means that Crown is incredibly forgiving to play. Next up is Fizz. Because champs like Zed, Yone, and Orianna are so strong at the moment, Fizz is making a comeback. He has barely any losing matchups in the current meta unless your opponent is Faker, a forgiving playstyle due to his E, and some of the best scaling in all of League as far as AP champs go right now. Unlike Sylas, we can play Fizz as a full glass cannon and abuse Ludens. Ludens gives us extra damage, movement speed, magic pen, and mana, which are all stats that Fizz really likes. When combined with Ionian Shoes and Hourglass, we have minimal downtime on our E and more than enough damage to one-rotate any squishy champion out of position. If we're confident enough, we can go Shadow Flame into Lichbane instead of an early Hourglass and really blow people out of the water. Pick up this champion this patch, I promise you, you won't regret it. Fizz is disgustingly overpowered when he's played at basically a semi-competent level. As you get more games under your belt on Fizz, you will definitely feel that consistency come up due to this build. ADC is in a pretty terrible spot at the moment. Crit items are super expensive, assassins are in meta, bruises are overpowered, and tank supports dominate. A combination of these things make you blow up just about instantly, no matter what you're against. Non-crit ADCs are hands down the way to go this patch, unless we're playing our first pick on this list. Caitlyn received some massive buffs to her headshot and to her ultimate's damage recently. These changes allow us to go first strike and get some hilarious damage in the early and mid game. It is not uncommon to delete 50 to 75% of somebody's HP after our first item with just our ulti, which leaves them vulnerable for a headshot or a teammate to secure the kill. This build is really crazy and it has a decent power curve. Instead of rushing a mythic, we want to buy a collector as soon as possible. This allows us to double dip on the AD and crit scaling for our ulti, making it hurt a bunch in the early game where lethality is the best. After that, we finish our boots, which are going to be Berserker's Greaves, and then we pick up a Yomu's Ghostblade. This 3-item spike will kill all but the tankiest of champions in a combo, and also allows us to get one of the most fun items in all of League next. As a 4th item, we can choose Axiom Arc if the enemy team is all squishy, or an LDR if they're on the tankier side. The Axiom Arc build is super fun to play because we can start a fight with our R, play it out normally, then have another R to pick off anyone that survives at the very end. It really isn't uncommon to get 2 1,500 damage ultimates in a single fight. Caitlyn with this build is incredibly strong, and it's one of the only builds that's keeping her viable. If you like playing Caitlyn, especially into these low range meta AD carries, then you need to try this build. It's so fun to play. Next on our list is Vayne. Vayne has been steadily climbing up the viability ladder for some time now. She's good into bruisers, does okay into the meta bot lanes, and gets to buy Shiv to cheat her early game. What makes Vayne so strong at the moment is the fact that she doesn't need to buy crit items like other ADCs to deal meaningful amounts of damage. Static Shiv into Trinity Force Vayne is one of the most slept on picks at the moment, with her win rates clearly showing this. If you're an AD player who doesn't want to conform to the Ezreal Kai'Sa meta currently, I highly recommend that you pick up Vayne and try out this build. This is really quite simple. We rush a static Shiv for the early game wave clear, then we go straight into Berserker's Greaves, followed by a Trinity Force. For our next 3 items, we can go into all situational items, or we can even go a tankier build. This allows us to still have high 1v1 potential, allows us to shred bruisers just as easily, but it also makes us strong in a side lane because we have meaningful amounts of wave clear and Triforce to push turrets. And finally, last but not least, we have our supports. The support meta in League is actually pretty diverse at the moment. Engage is most picked right now, with mages, enchanters, and carries all being pretty decent. There, however, are 2 supports that have been blatantly overbuffed this patch, so of course we're going to be covering them. Senna is first up on our list. The crit changes simply made her too strong. This champ needs a nerf, and this build makes this quite apparent. Lethality is high damage against every cast of champion due to the way that it works. Each point of lethality at level 18 is like an extra point of AD. The trade-off for the high damage is that it isn't supposed to scale well later on into the game unless we build other lethality items, since we can't really increase the damage in a meaningful way. It's always flat, until we throw crit into the equation. Senna's passive grants her free crit, making lethality Senna delete even the tankiest of champions in her Q into auto combo. Her infinite scaling nature also allows us to get a large amount of damage in the mid game without sacrificing too much from early game items. This allows us to rush Swiftness Boots and focus on staying alive into an Umbral Glaive immediately after. Umbral is cheap, gives us a decent amount of lethality, ability haste, and most importantly, AD. This, when combined with Eclipse as a 3rd item, gives us laughably high damage. A Q into passive with the crit will remove 70% of the HP off of a mid laner or an ADC, with us remaining completely safe due to Senna's excessive range. This build is bonkers this patch and is sure to get nerfed going into the next season. Abuse it while you can. Just remember that on Senna we don't always have to get the most amount of auto attacks possible. We can auto, walk away, come back, auto, and then Q in order to make the most out of this bursty playstyle. Prioritize your safety over dealing damage, the damage will come for free. Bard is our final champion for this video today. The reason for this is that Bard can build just about everything. This kit is so generalist that there isn't really a downside when it comes to building most items. They all work about the same on Bard, except for this build. Locket is hands down the best mythic on Bard at the moment. Radiant Virtue is also solid, but Locket is really cheap and it allows us to buy more expensive items earlier on because of it. For this reasons, we want to rush Locket, Swifties into Deadman's Play on Bard. This build augments Bard's roaming potential like no other. This also prevents us from getting one-shot and makes us high impact near allies. We can actually get in close, fish for our passive and for Qs, then save ourselves with a well-placed ulti in just about every fight with this build. It's durable, gives us a huge amount of movement speed, and rewards roams. It's really fun to play and horrible to play against. If you ever want to torture your opponent and have a great time yourself, give this build a spin. This build is just the outlier strongest build on Bard. This doesn't mean that it's the only build that's viable on him. I would recommend that you actually try out a plethora of builds on Bard and see what you like the most. Some people like playing AP Bard, people like playing Imperial Mandate Bard, some people prefer playing a Redemption early Bard. It's really up to you here. Anyways, this was Unsung with GameLeap. Thank you all for watching and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.